Hi guys, and welcome back to the PWYFA Play Where Your Feet Are podcast. Holy cannoli, it's been a fat minute. Wow, it's been a long time since we've been on the pod, and I'm so sorry about that. For good reason though, that we took a little bit of break. It was actually not a planned break whatsoever. Did not know I was going to be taking a pause, but it happened, and life happened, and there's so much to catch you guys up on, and I'm going to do just that, but on a different day. This podcast is not that at all, but we will have a podcast coming that is all about a major life update episode, because there are multiple, literally in every area of my life has happened and changed. So we'll save that for another day. But this episode today has some goodness in it. So much wisdom, and it's from none other than Mike Noriega. Now, Mike is awesome for a million and one reasons, but this podcast is so good because it talks about suffering and suffering well. He breaks down so much of how you're gonna go through struggle, but also how to recover, how to keep God at the center of everything, what God means in all of it at the same time. It's not quite the whole concept of like why bad things happen to good people, but it definitely tells us how to react to the bad things. It's so much wisdom. You're gonna love this episode. Let me also say, this episode was recorded quite some time ago, so much so that Mike and I are starting off this episode talking about planning for his wedding. Well, the man has now fully planned, fully been married, and I love his sweet wife, Ashley. So, some time has passed since this episode was recorded, but nonetheless, it's so powerful, and everything stands true to this day. Can confirm that it hit me just as hard editing this recently than it did when I heard it from him the first time. I love Mike so much. We met at church through VU Volleyball Crew, and he is just an incredible servant leader, preacher, pastor, not even official or anything, but he just truly plays where his feet are. No matter what, no matter where, he's always impacting others and finding purpose in his position. So y'all enjoy this episode with Mike. Let me say quickly before you get into the conversation to make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, whatever platform you're watching on. Make sure you do all the things to help us continue to spread the word of playing where your feet are. And don't forget, we got some merch. We actually have a ton of merch. This is one of them. My favorite crew neck we've ever created. It also comes in pink and blue. We also have t-shirts, hats, books. I have book 2 coming soon. That's really the reason why I had to pause. But so much, y'all. Y'all go check it out online. Everything is linked in the description below. Follow us on Instagram at Play Where Your Feet Are. That's where all of your information is going to be first and foremost. Always on Instagram first. That's our main kind of first initial breaking news source. But I love you guys. Thank you for sticking it out. I hope you came back and you're here for more, but we have more to come in season 3. We ain't done yet. We took a little break, but we're back, baby. Enjoy this episode with Mike Noriega. This is the PWYFA Play Where Your Feet Are podcast, and I'm your host, Cameron Dobbs. Mike Noriega, welcome to the PWYFA Play Where Your Feet Are podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Cam. I'm so excited.
It is an honor, and it is a long time coming, Mike. We have been talking about you coming on the podcast for, it feels like a year now. It has certainly been so long, really, since the minute I met you, not long after it. I'm getting ahead of myself, but not long after you were talking about writing a book. And so from that moment, we already found we had so many celebrities. What am I saying? Similarities. Wow. Words. That's what you get for talking all day for a living. We're doing it real here. But Mike and I, it goes back even further because we met about almost 2 years ago to this day or so. It's coming up on 2 years ago that we met. And it was because I wandered upon this random little volleyball VU crew from VU Church that Mike was leading. And it's funny looking back at that night for me because it was a night where this was the time that I was living in Atlanta, but working in Miami. And I had a friend that was kind of new to VU Church, but she was thinking, maybe I'll go to this volleyball VU crew thing tonight. And she was like, Cam, you played volleyball. Do you want to come? And we were like, oh, I don't know. I just flew in. I'm kind of tired. We could get food. And for some odd reason, or for some God reason, we ended up going to this volleyball VU crew, and it ended up being an absolute blast. And I really met so many of my first friends at VU, but really so many of my friends that are so close to this day, including the man on the podcast today, Mike Noriega. And so that was just such a fun memory. And I love that our friendship is rooted in that volleyball crew, because it's such a fun and beautiful time that y'all are still doing to this day. But we stayed connected ever since then. And I got to learn more and more of your story. And I get to see more and more of your heart every single day. And now you're walking through a super exciting season of being engaged and planning a wedding and all the things, Mike. But you also have such an awesome heart. And I got to see a lot of that back in the day as well, when I got to be honored to be a part of that special and sweet Surfside Memorial, to honor those loved ones that not only you lost, but everyone lost, and South Florida lost, and Florida lost. And that was really where I started seeing more of your heart and your passion for others, and your passion for ministry, and your passion for everything that you do. And so today I'm so excited just to open this space for you, and to give you another platform that you can walk into and own and speak confidently into it, because I know our listeners are so excited to hear from you, and I'm excited to hear from you. And so I want to just get right into this, because I know both of us are talkers and we could go all day. But I also know that our listeners want to hear a little bit about you. So before we jump in fully, talk to us, break us down. What's going on in your life right now? How's wedding planning going?
Oh my gosh. So wedding planning is happening so fast. We got engaged in December, and it was such a beautiful time. I actually threw my fiance a surprise birthday party, and that wasn't the only surprise. So we were doing an honor circle, because kind of in the VU Church community culture, we have this culture of honoring people, honoring up, honoring down, honoring all around. And I just, we had this honor circle where other people were just kind of sharing their heart of how Ashley has impacted them. And then at the very end, I got to honor her. And I basically said to her, before I get on one knee right now, I wanted you to know that I've been on two knees about this for a long time, and asked her to marry me. And so that is a huge praise report that's happened in my life, because a waiting season is not a wasted season. I had to wait a long time. That is a whole other podcast that we could do. But yeah, this is an exciting season. Um, my gosh, like, just the doors that God is opening up. It's so cool when you're stepping into spaces that God has opened up the door, because then you just feel this beautiful responsibility to just steward it in a way that honors Him, because it wasn't in your own strength. So yeah, by trade, I've always been an entrepreneur. Actually, since I graduated high school, I've never had a job before. I got licensed as a financial professional very early on at 19 years old, and I built a financial brokerage. And then life changed about 2.5 years ago, when I lost my grandmother in the Surfside condo collapse. So that's just a little bit about me.
I love it so much. And I love you so much. I really do. And I admire you. You're so beautiful in the way that you walk out your faith and your walk with Christ. It's so special to see. And I'm honored to even say that I know you, and that I have you on the podcast, and that I can call you a friend. Because it's really
The
so
feeling is
cool.
mutual. It's
Oh,
completely mutual.
it's really awesome to see you, and I just see you thriving right now, and with Ashley by your side, and you're in the wedding planning season, and that's such a, like you said, that's such an answered prayer for you. But also just in everything that you're doing. When I'm at Somi every Sunday, and I get to see you up on the screen at front row at City, and I get to see you up there, raising your hands or whatever you're doing, and then Pastor Rich shouting out you too. This past week was so fun, and you're in your matching VU merch, and just it's so fun. And so I love seeing you shine your light for Christ, and let the spotlight that's on you reflect further on Him. It's really awesome. And I just say that, one, to honor you, because we do honor, but also for our listeners to know that the man that you have on this podcast today is an incredible man of God, and an incredible example, and so wise. And so I'm excited for you to now just pour a little bit about your heart out to us, and you touched on it there at the end, that your life changed about 2.5 years ago with the Surfside condo collapse. And so one thing that has stemmed out of that is you talk about this uncollapsible soul. So, Mike, tell us about that uncollapsible soul. And also for listeners that maybe aren't native to Florida and maybe don't know as much about the Surfside collapse, go ahead and just enlighten them with that as well.
Absolutely. So one thing I love so much about you, Cam, is our stories are so different, but they're absolutely the same. And I think that everybody listening under the sound of our voices are going to realize that by the end of this. But on June 24th, 2021, there was a building in Surfside, actually on the border of where Miami Beach ends and Surfside begins, where my grandmother lived. And I got a phone call at 1:30 in the morning, and it was from my mother. And she, my mother used to work as a nurse practitioner in admissions all night in the hospital. And so she knows I can kind of be a night owl a little bit. And so she would call me every once in a while when it would slow down. But when she called me and I saw that call coming in, I realized, wait a second, she's not working tonight. Why would she be calling me? And so when I answered, she said to me, "Hey, your father just got a phone call. Something happened to your grandmother's building. Your brother," which my brother, by the way, is also a first responder along with my mom and my father. She said, "Your brother's on his way to pick me up right now. And then we're coming to you and picking you up and we're going to Surfside." And I was like, "Mom, it's 1:30 in the morning. Like, what happened to the building? What's going on here?" Like, it just, something was off. And so I couldn't find anything online. I couldn't find anything on social media. The news hadn't said anything. So I went ahead and called the Surfside Police Department, and they answered. And I said, "Hey, listen, I just got this call before we all just like uproot our lives in the middle of the night and drive over there. What's going on?" And they said, "Well, we can't really tell you, but it's not really good." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like, can you give me a little bit more clarity? Like, is this something that my entire family should be heading over there at 1:30 in the morning?" And I'll never forget their response. They said, "Yeah, you should get here fast." And that just, it really scared me because I had no idea what to expect. And what I didn't know at this time was it was a partial building collapse. So about a third of the building collapsed. So a family friend that lived in the building and in the part that did not collapse had called my father, and she was frantic. She was so scared and just was crying in hysterics when she called my father. And so all that she could say to try to make some sort of sense of what just happened was there was an explosion in the building. So I was thinking that's the only context that I knew because my father had told that to my mom and she had told that to me. And I thought, maybe like, somebody microwaved metal and, in a half sleep, and there was a little explosion in the microwave and that was the explosion. Or maybe somebody, left the stove on and it created a little gas explosion, like nothing crazy. But nothing could have prepared me for when I walked up and it looked like a planned demolition. It looked like something out of a movie where, like a disaster movie, like San Andreas or something like that. And walking up through the sea of first responders and seeing that my grandmother's building was literally rubble, and seeing that, I didn't know this at the time, but the building was 12 stories tall. And so the first 6 stories were actually in the parking garage, meaning all that you could see was the top half of the building. That was what that rubble was. And so my grandmother lived on the 6th floor, and her balcony was just the first thing that we saw. And we knew it was her balcony because it was her balcony furniture. She had specific tile on the balcony. And I fell to my knees. I didn't know what to do. Have you ever had a dream that was so vivid that when you woke up, the feelings were so real that you had to convince yourself that it was a dream? Like, it felt real, but it didn't really happen. And I started trying to convince myself the reverse, that this is a dream. I'm going to wake up. There's no way this is real. And once I started to accept that this was my reality, that this was not a dream that I was going to wake up from, my mind started going to other areas of denial. Maybe this was a planned demolition. And my grandmother, since she was the oldest one in the building at 92 years old, maybe forgot to tell us, and they safely moved everybody out of the building. I mean, my brain was trying to make some sort of sense of it. So I was just on my knees, just crying out to God for the first, I don't even know how long it was, maybe half hour that I was there, just overwhelmed, just in shock. And I got up and I realized, oh my gosh, my father's been here the whole time. And I ran over to him, and my father was the chief of police for the Miami Beach Police Department previously, and he's now the current chief of the North Bay Village Police Department. And I'd never seen my father cry publicly before. And very few times have I ever seen him cry like at home or at my parents' place. And just seeing my father weeping in public, it just did something to me. It just like a part of my soul broke. And it just felt like, look, I can only say it this way. There are some situations in life that we will each face in which no man can save you. That your first response can only be crying out to God, because the only person that can help you is if God shows up as your first responder. So I'll never forget, to try to cope with the situation, it felt like I was in hell on earth. And I tucked myself away in the entrance of the building next door, the Solera Hotel. And I just popped in these AirPods and I started listening to the song by Vu Worship called Shelter In. And it just proclaims all of the promises of Psalm 91 or 93, Psalm 91 or 93. And the song talks about 1,000 may fall to my left, 10,000 more to my right. But the ultimate message of the song is that God is our refuge, God is our strength, that He is our firm foundation, that everything can be going wrong around us, but because of His presence, everything can be okay within us. And I'll never forget that the Holy Spirit spoke a word in my heart. I didn't hear it audibly, but it was just this peace that just overwhelmed me. And it was because my prayer was, God, like, please don't let my grandmother be underneath there. But if she was, like, I ask that you rescue her. I ask that you would be the one sheltering her in. And it was like the Holy Spirit whispered to me, son, your grandmother, Kima, she loved me with all her heart. She lived her life from an overflow of my love for her. So if she is alive underneath that rubble, it's my presence that's sustaining her, and I'll get the glory for her story. But if her body's underneath that rubble, but her soul is not, it's because her soul's sustained in my presence in heaven, and she's already wrapped in my arms. Either way, she's in my presence. Do you trust me with either outcome? Mm. And that was really the peace that I needed, that shifted everything for me, because it made me realize, it reminded me of something so important that I had learned in a previous crushing season of my life, that it was the way to a crushed spirit is attaching your faith to outcomes. Mm. Because the truth is that we're not always going to get the outcomes that we want. So if that is what's going to determine the strength of your faith, well, that's a weak foundation, because we're not always going to get the outcomes that we want. I love how in your book you started out with it's either I'm so sorry, I'm so off today, but it's either Psalm 19:21 or Proverbs 19:21.
Proverbs 19:21. Proverbs 19:21. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, that many are the plans in a person's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. And what that ultimately means is that plans won't always turn out the way that we want, but that doesn't change our purpose. Yeah. That our plans may fall, but that doesn't mean that our purpose collapses. And so many times what happens is, when we have unexpected plans, especially in a traumatic sense, so many people just become tempted to surrender their purpose instead of surrendering their plans. Yeah. And so, I had talked about a message at VU recently that, God doesn't always give us, well, Pastor Rich preached how God doesn't always give us a plan, but He gives us a promise. And so what I talked about is, if the promise is the plan, then surrender is the strategy.
Mhm.
And if surrender is the strategy, then submission is the mission, because surrender and submission are completely different. I used to think they were the same, but surrender is about what you let go of, and submission is about what you hold on to.
Mhm.
And so many times, what happens is we actually surrender our purpose and submit to plans, but we have to surrender our plans and submit to His
Mhm.
purpose. And so, dealing with all of that, my life was never the same, because it was like, okay, God, like, you're doing something here. And part of where our story is the same is that God has given you a voice, and
Mhm.
along with your voice, He's given you a platform, and you're stewarding it to the best of your ability and doing an amazing job. There's a reason that God's always putting a microphone into your hand, Cam. But at the same time, it's like, for me, I wasn't. That was not something that I was used to at all. And so my father had told me, "Look, I don't have the strength, the capacity,
Mhm.
or even the desire to share the story in the media, but they're going to share it anyways, and it's not their story to tell. So will you represent the inquiries that are coming to my police department and represent our family and your grandmother?" And God started to use my voice and give me a platform, but it was because of the message that He had put in my heart. And it was that other people needed to find out how they could have hope through heartbreak, that despite the collapse that's happening around them, that it doesn't have to allow a collapse within them. And so, I know there's a really long answer to your question, but that led me to where we're at right now, which is this whole thing of uncollapsible soul, which uncollapsible is not even a word in the English dictionary. Collapsible is, but uncollapsible is not. And what really brought me to this whole idea of an uncollapsible soul is right in the middle of what was called the Wall of Hope, right across the street from the collapse. There was all kinds of pictures and flowers. It was like a mourning wall for those that were still missing at the time. And it was also like a prayer wall. And so in the middle of it was uh, Psalm 34:18, that the Lord is near to the brokenhearted, and He rescues those that are crushed in spirit. And this verse just kept showing up in my life in that season over and over and over. And just one day in January of 2022, I heard it. I heard it in a fresh way. And I heard it in a way that said to me that the reason that God is near to the brokenhearted, but He rescues those that are crushed in spirit, is because they're different. That what happens is, when we go through a broken heart, it's not something that we can avoid, because we all go through different forms of loss. It can be a burial, a betrayal, it can be a breakup, or a breakdown. And a lot of times when you go through one of those four things, there's a grieving process attached. And so that's just part of life. And so the Lord is trying to be near to you when you're going through that, but He's trying to rescue you away from being crushed in spirit. Why? Because when your spirit is crushed, you lose your faith, your hope, and your purpose. You're like a well without water. You're like a bird without wings, where it's like, what do I do now? What do I exist here on earth for? And so what happens is, when we allow things to not just break our heart, but to crush our spirit, we turn what God meant to become a life season into a life sentence. And so what I did is, in learning about that, I realized, oh my gosh, when you can allow things to break your heart without breaking your spirit, it makes your soul uncollapsible. Because Scripture talks about how the righteous fall 7 times, but get back up, but the wicked collapse and crumble. That's in the Amplified Bible version. And the reason why is because the reason I think that it's wicked to stay down is it takes faith to get back up when you've fallen. But the Bible doesn't say that it's wrong to fall. It's just wrong to not get back up. So when your soul is uncollapsible, you start to learn that falling isn't failing, that your pain doesn't define you, rather it refines you if you allow it to.
That's so beautiful. Everything in that. I mean, you were just preaching from the beginning, but that ending too is awesome, because I mentioned this a lot too, these two phrases of, first I talk about the phrase, it's okay to not be okay. And it
Yes.
is. It is okay to not be okay. But let's not stay at being not okay. Let's get you back to being okay. And I think it's the same concept there, that it's okay if you fall. It's okay if you're down right now. That's okay. It happens to everyone. Let's just not stay there. Let's get you back to
Yeah.
being your best. Let's get you back to being better than ever before. You know, Chad Veach preached last weekend about how God will do it again, but he'll do it again and you'll be better this time around, or the situation will be better this time around. And it's just so beautiful when you almost take that pressure off of yourself and knowing that falling is not failing. I love that. Falling is not failing. And I had actually our first ever guest episode in season 1 was with Victoria Garrick, and she talked about how fail, FAIL, only stands for first attempt in learning. And
That's good.
if you fail again, then it's just further attempts in learning. And it's okay. Failure is not a failure as we see it. It's simply just learning. You're taking steps and you're learning and you're learning and you're learning. And as long as you learn from it, it's totally okay. As long as you get back up, it's totally okay. As long as you get back to being okay, it's totally okay to not be okay. But Mike, man,
Oh
so
yeah.
many beautiful things through there, talking about Psalm 34:18, about the Lord being close to the brokenhearted and rescuing the spirits who are crushed. So many different points that I would love to build off of. One thing that you talked about too is this repair, this relief, this grieving process that you go through. You talk a lot about that in the book as well, of finding that repair and relief. And so, without giving us away your entire book, because I do want everyone to go buy it and read it themselves, how best can we do that when we face grief? How best can we find repair and find that relief when we're grieving?
Absolutely. So what I've learned is the ultimate difference between falling and collapsing. It's the meaning that you give your pain.
Mm,
And I learned this. I'm going to kind of give away a plot twist of the book, but the truth of the matter is that, I believe that there's somebody that's listening to this that they need to hear this.
mm,
The real reason that I wrote this book was not because of the Surfside collapse.
mm,
The real reason that I wrote this book is because of another season of my life where I went through a divorce.
mhm,
And to make a very long story short, I had gotten married in 2010. I believed that God had someone special to me or for me, but there were parts of me that God had not matured yet.
mm,
And so I married a patient, not a partner. And one night I came home and she had her bags packed and she's like, "Hey, I need some space. I'm gonna go spend the night at my mom's house." And basically, she left that night and never came back. And it was because she was having a full blown affair.
oh,
And I really believed that God was going to save my marriage because I had saved myself
mm,
for her. And like 60 days from the night that she left me, we were actually legally divorced.
wow,
And I didn't show up to court that morning because I just was trying to create space for God to do a miracle. Like I believed everything inside of me that God was going to give me the outcome that I had planned on. And the outcome that I planned on was that God was going to save my marriage, but he didn't.
mm,
And so the only way I can describe that experience was that the night my wife left me, my heart was broken. But the day that God didn't save my marriage, my spirit was crushed.
mm,
And the meaning I gave my pain was, God, I can't trust you. Because I looked at it like, God, I had saved myself for this woman.
mhm,
I had done everything your way, and your way didn't work. Plus, even after I found out about an affair, I still was willing to make the marriage work and believed you were going to save the marriage, and you didn't. What kind of God are you? Where were you? Why didn't you show up? I trusted you. And so the meaning that I gave my pain is God didn't love me as much as I thought he did. And the other part of the meaning I gave my pain was that I'm not worthy of love. And so I started settling for cheap imitations of love that the world offers. And I settled for external validation in an area of my life that should have had intimacy.
mm,
And so I just started losing everything by chasing nothing.
mm,
And at that time in my life, I was working out so much, but for all the wrong reasons. Because again, I didn't think I was worthy of love. I felt insecure. I felt like that that betrayal and abandonment, that I was never going to find somebody. So I was just trying to do everything to earn any external validation that I could get. And I realized that when you work out, that you don't get stronger in the gym. You actually get weaker. You're tearing down your muscle fibers to failure. It just, the way you get stronger is really if you put the right amount of sleep, water, protein, carbs into your body, so that those 2-3 days following afterwards, that your muscles can grow back stronger. And I realized a year or two later, after my divorce, well, if God made our bodies this way, how much more so did he make our spiritual fibers in this way? And so it put the responsibility back on me. What am I putting into my spirit to rebuild my spirit back stronger? The other thing that I realized was that my pain had turned into pride. Why? Because passion is neutral. This isn't something that's ever really talked about, but the truth is that when your passion is rooted in resentment, it takes you down a path of bitterness. And bitterness is just a passion for hatred, a passion for anger. And it's like a wound that doesn't heal but gets infected. But when you take your passion and you put it towards restoration, the byproduct of that is joy, because you allow God to heal you, because you allow the promise of Romans 8:28 to come true in your life, where he starts to work all things for the good of those that love him. And so you start to see how God worked even the worst of situations for your good. So I started to look back at Jesus, but I had a perspective shift. And what I realized was that Jesus was perfect. He was God in the flesh, but yet he went through mental, emotional, physical, and even spiritual torture. He went through betrayal, abandonment. I mean, he even wept. I mean, think about this. Jesus, if anybody could have opted out of sorrow, it's him. But he chose to opt into everything that we felt, yet he was perfect. He had full authority of heaven, yet claimed none of it. And if there's anybody that shouldn't have been betrayed or tortured or abandoned or any of those things, it's Jesus. Yet he went through it. And so that perspective shift made me realize, wait a second, this isn't the God of sympathy that throws lightning bolts at us from heaven, like a Zeus type figure. No, this is the God of empathy, that he not only has felt our pain, but he still feels our pain. The evidence of this is that Jesus had announced twice to his family and friends that he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. And yet, the shortest verse in all of Scripture is that Jesus wept. The context of that verse is so powerful, because he knew he was about to raise Lazarus from the dead, because he had said it twice. So was he crying because his friend was dead? No. His heart was broken for those that he loved around him. He was showing that he's the God of empathy. And he was also showing that he can even take the worst of situation. See, that what everybody there wanted was a healing. But Jesus was like, no, no, no. I am the resurrection. So I'm going to do a resurrection to exemplify that. Yeah. And understanding that made me realize, wait, God, I can trust you. It's just my theology was off, because my faith was built on a weak foundation. So I say all of that to say that, you know, it's okay to not be okay, but you're 100% right, Cam. You just can't stay there. You have to go through a healing process. And so this isn't like, you can't over spiritualize this. It's very practical, because the truth is that if you get into a car accident and you break a bone so bad that it's a compound fracture, where you have like your bone like sticking out of your arm, nobody's going to say, oh, like, all things heal with time. No, there's some steps that you're going to implement, because you need first responders. And so in my book, I have what's called the 5 requisites to restoration. And basically, requisites, it's think of school, right? You take a prerequisite as a step towards something else. And so each step that I'm going to go over, they really they feed into one another, and they have to go in this order. So the first step to healing is you have to reveal it. You have to recognize your heartbreak. And what that means is that you have to acknowledge your pain. That sounds so common sense, but we live in a world that really says that all things heal with time. And I don't believe that's true. I believe that all things get revealed with time, But if you don't face your pain will eventually face you, and it'll probably come out in a way where it's showing that it's controlling you because you haven't acknowledged it. So after you've actually acknowledged your pain, like let's use a simple example. Let's say you're in the kitchen and you cut your hand really bad. Well, you have to acknowledge the bleeding, you have to acknowledge the cut. But then the next step is you have to relieve it. You have to respond to your grief, which means that you have to address your pain. That might mean that you grab like a paper towel and stop the bleeding. It might mean that you put it under the sink and wash it out. But that cut might be so bad that you actually need some help outside of yourself. I think you know where I'm going with this, Cam. You got to release it. You got to relinquish your anguish, which means you have to surrender your pain. Maybe your hand needs stitches. Maybe you cut a tendon and you have to go through a little surgical repair. Either way, you have to surrender to the help of first responders and medical professionals. Now, here's where people get confused. A lot of times people avoid healing because healing hurts. When they're scrubbing out that wound, it's going to hurt. When they're stitching you up, it's going to hurt. If you go to surgery, it's going to hurt. But here's the thing, just because you're hurting doesn't mean that you're not healing. So pain can't be the only indicator. So just to back up a little bit, first thing is you got to recognize your heartbreak. Then you have to respond to your grief. Then you have to relinquish your anguish. And then the fourth requisite is you have to reframe it. You have to rename your pain. And I love how you talked about this, like right before you asked me this question about, defining these steps. But what that ultimately means is that a wound that is healed is no longer called a wound. It's called a scar. And that scar tissue, it won't look the same, but guess what? It can't bleed, can't get infected. And now that scar, even though it doesn't look the same, is a testimony of triumph. And you can share with other people. And then the last step to healing is you have to actually renew it. What do I mean by that? You have to redeem your sorrow. Redeeming, like when I think of redeeming, I think of like trading a coupon at a store for a discount, right? It's a swap. So what happens is that God promises that he will turn every single tear of sorrow into tears of joy, which means that he draws purpose from our pain. That what you start to learn is once you're healed, that your pain is so much bigger than you. That there is someone praying right now for a miracle and they need hope. And your story of your healing is going to help them bridge between where they're at and the miracle that they need to get them from, in between. And so I really believe that most of the time you look at scripture, God used people for miracles. That how do you like it's so interesting to me that a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle on fire. And I believe that when you're healed, you start to light other souls on fire. And so ultimately, when you learn that your pain is so much bigger than you start to realize that there's a bigger story and it's about God's glory. And he starts to use you as a miracle in other people's lives.
So beautifully said, Mike. Man, I am so excited just for everyone to hear this, quite honestly. And I love that everything about your story, everything that you speak on, everything that you write about, everything that you post about, it's so personal, but at the same time, it is so practical. You have those steps that people can actually take, saying like, this isn't all fluff and stuff. It's not even great scripture. It's that, yes, all of that, but it's also, hey, step by step, you can do this. Let's break it down. Let's make it easy. I believe that God is a God of simple rather than complex. I mean, Jesus
Yes.
spoke in parables so that people could easily understand. He was a storyteller himself. And I think that you model that in the same way that, hey, I'm gonna explain this in an analogy about cutting your hand so that you guys can better understand what I'm speaking about here. And you also break it down in those practical steps at the same time. So it's so beautifully communicated. I can't even comment, I feel like, because it's just retweet to everything you just said. It is amazing. And you're on point here. And I cannot wait for people to listen and for me to edit and be able to listen back to this and just enjoy it as I'm editing. But Mike, in everything that you write about and everything that you speak about, that you say, you talk about these practical steps, you talk about these points, these certain phrases that you have. Summing everything up for everyone, what do you really hope that readers and listeners take away from your message in your book?
Absolutely. I think the biggest takeaway is that we all have to go through healing.
Mm.
That our situations around us might be completely different, but the feelings that we go through are all the same. And so, because of that, we all need to go through the same healing process, even though the situations might be different. And so, if there's somebody that's under the sound of my voice that you're going through something because you know you haven't gone through the healing process, well, bearing the pain won't make it go away.
Mm.
And for those that have gone through the healing process and you still have pain, oh my gosh, that does not mean that you're not healed. And I want to like kind of tie all this up with a bow on it. There's a lot of stories that came out of Surfside, and two of the most impactful stories. I didn't, so through the whole process of Surfside, I didn't meet any of the families until close to the 1 year anniversary. And the reason why is because I was with the first responders instead of the families that were displaced. And I got added onto this WhatsApp chat, and as I started connecting with all these different families, it was so surreal because it had been about my pain. It had been about the loss of my grandmother. It had been about my trauma. But then I started to not just read about news stories, but I started to build relationships with each person. It started to become so personal for me. And two of the most impactful stories are um, Devin Gonzalez came home from volleyball practice one night, and her and her dad and her mom, Angela, they watched a movie. It was a scary movie. She didn't want to go to bed by herself, so she slept between her parents. And while she was sleeping, the foundations of the Champlain Tower South building, before it collapsed, the foundations collapsed, and there was about 7 seconds before the building came down. Somehow, in the 7 seconds between the snapping of the columns at the foundation and the building actually falling, Angela woke up and just grabbed her daughter out of bed and just ripped her out of bed and said, "Run!" And they started running out of the bedroom, and the walls around them and the floor beneath them just melted away. And Angela fell 6 stories, and Devin landed on top of her mom and then rolled down probably another story or two. Devin had a compound fracture out of where her femur bone was just sticking out of her leg, and she was bleeding out. Angela's insides, part of her insides were crushed, so she was bleeding internally. And the reason that story touches me so much is, unfortunately, Angela's husband, Devin's dad, passed away. He was one of the 98 people that was killed in the Surfside condo collapse. But Angela woke up 5 days later on her birthday. Talk about celebrating new life. I mean, that still floors me to this day. Devin, when firefighters found her and she was bleeding out, the first thing that she said was, "I have a volleyball tournament this Saturday." And it just goes to show her love of the game and just also how she hadn't processed what had happened yet. But Devin, she started, she went through surgeries, and she started to go through rehab and all the physical therapy. And in October of 2022, Angela reached out to me to watch Devin play her first official volleyball game post Surfside collapse. And it was also her senior night. And I felt like honored family to be there for that moment. And you could see while Devin was playing, there was this giant scar down her leg. And I mean, you could just see the pain and how she was playing. And at the very end, they won that game, by the way. And Devin played so good. But the moment that game was over, she just broke down weeping. And I felt like I totally understood why. It was because she played so good, but she didn't play like she used to.
Mm.
That she's come so far, but she still has so much pain in her leg. That her dad would be so proud of her that her first game back she won, but he's not there.
Mhm.
And there's this duality and this war inside of each and every single one of us that we all, maybe we lost somebody and maybe we went through a breakup or divorce or a betrayal, like whatever it is, you might still have pain after you heal, but that doesn't mean that you're healed. Paul talks about how he had a thorn in his side, and it's a big mystery of what Paul's thorn in his side was. But I believe, can't prove this, but I believe Paul's thorn in his side was his past. He used to murder Christians, and God's response when he asked God 3 times, take this thorn, take this pain away from me. God said to him, my grace is enough. My grace is sufficient. And I think we need to give ourselves grace because we each, because of our past, have a thorn in our side. We each, because of our past, have pain. So the biggest takeaway is if you have pain that's not dealt with, well, go through that healing process so that your soul doesn't become, doesn't become poisoned with toxins, poisoned with bitterness. Even if you have gone through the healing process, but you still have pain, that's okay too, because that's the thorn in your side. It's okay to have pain. It's just not okay for pain to have you.
Mm.
It's okay to have fear. It's just not okay for fear to have you. Something that I've learned through this whole process, Cam, is that when like a venomous creature like a snake or a scorpion injects its venom into you, that it can actually kill you, and that most snake bites are actually deadly.
Mm-hmm.
But because of anti-venom, most people don't die from snake bites.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because if you inject a minuscule amount of that venom, your body actually builds antibodies. And the antibodies that are built within your own body create anti-venom. What does that mean? Maybe what feels like a curse is actually going to become a cure.
Wow.
Maybe the very thing that's giving you pain is actually giving you purpose. When you break a bone, that same breaking also contains the same healing. That the bone is the very thing that heals the broken bone. That the venom is actually the very thing that is extracted, or the anti-venom is extracted from it to bring your healing. In other words, God has a way of taking the very thing that you think has broken your heart and your spirit to actually heal your spirit and use you as a miracle in somebody else's life. So if I could just sum it up very quickly, I would say that your pain is not meant to define you. Your identity is not attached to your pain. Rather, your pain can actually refine you. And in that, when you learn to get back up, when you allow things to break your heart without breaking your spirit, you start to learn that falling doesn't mean failure. Rather, and the very thing where you've experienced falling is probably the same place that God will reveal your calling. And so I hope that encourages somebody today, because in my story and in your story, I couldn't go back to my career after losing my grandmother in the Surfside collapse. Life was not the same. After having multiple concussions and ending your volleyball career, life was not the same. But there's so much favor in your life. There really is, Cam. Like, you're such an inspiration to so many people, because ultimately playing where your feet are, I think I'm jumping ahead, but I think what that ultimately means is that you can't change, manipulate, or speed up the season of life that you're in. You can only surrender your season and steward your season. And when you do those two things, God blesses your season.
That's so beautiful. Oh, wow. You are Preaching, and I loved it. You said you hoped that someone be encouraged that by that word, and I'll tell you that if no one else was, which I know everyone else will be, I was also encouraged by it, and so incredibly sad. Just a note about Devin that I think is so special is that I knew Devin as a volleyball player, and I remember I actually coached her at Miami volleyball camp when I was a player, and
Come
I
on.
had her. And it's funny because I knew her as kind of like this timid younger girl that was a little off to the side from everyone, but I just gravitated toward her. And I remember I have vivid memory of sitting outside the dorms at UM, sitting with Devin at night because it was an overnight camp. You would stay several days. And I just remember sitting out there with her at night, and she would open up to me, day after day, and just we kind of became friends. And she was kind of my girl that I liked. And then I really loved her, and I saw something in her, and she just worked so hard and she grinded, and she didn't care how good or bad or what court she was on or anything. She just wanted to play volleyball, and she loved it, and she worked so hard. And I remember the last day I actually met her parents, and her mom had told me that they had all like followed me on Instagram before, and that they had had conversations at their dinner table because of things that I had posted on Instagram. And so Devin is actually written about in my book, just in that concept, because I knew when I heard that phrase from her mom, I was like, what we're doing in our lives, the posts that we make on social media, the things that we write, the captions that we have, the songs that we share, it's much more than just lasting 24 hours on a story. It really does have the impact to impact people's lives. It has that
So
opportunity
good.
to do just that. And I think that's what playing where your feet are is too. It's knowing that you're taking advantage, you're not just taking up space on this earth, that because this earth and this planet is such, and our lives are such a vapor of air flashing by so quickly, that if we don't take advantage of it, it will just flash by and it will just be a speck of dust and we won't leave any impact. And sure, that's fine, whatever. Or you could make an impact. You could choose to play where your feet are, and you could impact so many, just like Devin impacted me, just like I impacted her, just like she is now impacting the world. The way that her and her mother have now been able to share their story of their Surfside experience and go on national news. Same thing with you, having the platforms that you're doing, having the podcast opportunities, the 700 Club, the speaking opportunities, everything that you're up to is so beautiful. We talk about God's favor. And that's what your obedience does, is it gives you this God's favor. Not that you have to earn it at all, but I think walking in obedience, he is just going to continue to elevate you. He's going to continue to elevate Devin. He's going to continue to elevate myself and all of us as we just keep taking these steps of playing where our feet are, doing our best and being our best no matter what, no matter where. And whether our best is weeping in the corner one day, dealing with our pain and hurt, or our best is preaching on a stage about how we are now redeemed and we have this revelation. Either way, and everything in between, whatever your best is your best that day. It doesn't matter whether it's good, bad, or ugly. If it is your best effort, your best foot forward, your best version of becoming your best self, that's all that matters. And that's what playing where your feet are is exactly. Now, Mike, I want to ask you, I'm going off script a little bit here, but this book is so beautiful for those who have gone through pain. It's so beautiful for those who will go through pain, aka everyone, because we will all go through pain. But I also think that it's a great read for others to understand how to help others heal as well. And so, speaking to someone who maybe is in a situation where their life is great and they're doing good. They've gone through pain, but they're healed now, or maybe they haven't really gone through pain and they'll face it eventually. And so they're taking notes here, but maybe they have a friend that's really going through it right now. What advice or what wisdom, what encouragement do you have for them? The person who, hey, I'm looking for something I can do for other people. What would you tell them?
I would say that empathy is the superpower that unites all of us.
Mm.
The Not to be preachy, but the ultimate reason that I choose to be a Christian, you're like, Mike, you've like been preaching this entire
I'm
time.
like,
Why are
you
you going to
don't have
stop
to
now?
apologize.
But the ultimate reason, when I've had people ask me, like, why do you choose to be a Christian? There's so many religions and faiths. Because ultimately, every single religion, every single faith is centered around this idea of trying to get to God. It's based on your efforts. But for me, it changes everything that I could never get to God, but God came to me. And the fact that God came to me and opted out of nothing so that he could empathize with us, oh my gosh, that's what makes me trust God. And it's just so funny. Like, I appreciate that so much now because there was a time where I felt betrayed by God because I had a very immature perspective of who God was. And I just think that if you have a friend, a family member, anybody that's going through it, man, like the greatest thing you could do, like, let me tell you the worst thing you could do. Give them a cheap cliche. Like, oh, sorry you went through that loss. Heaven needed an angel. They're in a much better place now. Like, oh, sorry she cheated on you. She wasn't good enough for you anyway. It's like that's like those things might be true to a degree, but they lack empathy. And so I would say if you have gone through pain, you've gone through a healing process, and especially if like God's given you like a voice, use that to speak empathy into the people's lives around you because you can relate. I think the best preachers on planet Earth are not the ones that think that they're the best speakers and they have the most knowledge. And I think the best preachers on earth are the ones that when they're preaching, they see themselves sitting in that chair, that they see a piece of who God rescued them from, like he sees who they were in that audience, and they're just trying to reach into that soul. Why? Because that preacher has empathy. They see the need for the love of God and for the need of community. Let me put it to you this way: we need God, but we need each other. Like that was something that I saw from the Surfside collapse, that the community just it was neighbors, it was the Jewish community, the Christian community, the Catholic community. There was all different types of political figures, people I never thought would ever want to be in the same room politically, actual politicians. They were all working together. Why? Because one of the blessings of adversity and loss and trauma is that pain has, C.S. Lewis said that pain is God's megaphone. That oftentimes when we're going through pain and trauma and loss, we start to forget about all the things that ultimately don't matter, and we start to focus on what matters. And the beautiful part of that is that we start to find unity and community because we focus on what unites us instead of what divides us. And in the case of Surfside, everybody was looking for a solution to which there was no solution to this problem. And all everybody could do is just be there for each other. And that's what we need to do for others. You mentioned at the beginning that we met at volleyball crew, which for anybody that doesn't know, like the VU crew language, VU church, the small groups are called VU crews because it sounds pretty catchy and cool. But we have fitness crews. And so I had started the first ever volleyball crew with my co-lead, Natasha. And the reason why, believe it or not, it was directly tied to Surfside. That at that time when I was going through everything, I had already been at VU Church for years. I wasn't so involved on the crew side of things. And there were so many people that surrounded me. And it reminded me of the scripture where four men carry a paralyzed man to Jesus. And Jesus is in a house that's so full that they somehow are audacious enough to carry this paralyzed man to the roof, dig a hole through this clay roof, lower him to the feet of Jesus. And Jesus like looks at the man, looks up at them, and then looks back at the paralyzed man and says, because of their faith, you're healed. And it made me realize that there are seasons of life that we need other people to carry us, not because we're in pain, but because we're injured. But you're not meant, like once you receive your healing, it's no longer about you receiving your healing. You've gotten your healing. Now you got to carry somebody else on that map. Now you got to go and do the same for somebody else. So I say all that to say that we all need community. And I think there's no better community than a faith-filled community. I mean, if Jesus walked with 12 disciples, who are we to think that we can do it on our own or by ourselves? And so with all that being said, I truly hope that this encourages somebody, because we need God, but we do need each other as well.
So beautiful. That's actually another story in scripture that I have in my book too. And I think that there's a Harvard professor that says that isolation is the enemy of improvement. And I think that it's
Yes.
just so beautiful because it is. Isolation is the enemy of improvement. And if you think about that in career or work or teams, think about that in life too. Isolation is the enemy of improvement. If we are looking to grow and to change and improve, we can't live isolated lives. Jesus did not come and God did not create this world for it to be a world of loneliness or a world of
Yeah.
doing things by yourself. We already mentioned it, how obviously we need God, how sometimes you need to surrender and submit. In fact, all the time you need to surrender and submit, not just sometimes. But people are so necessary. And Proverbs as well says that victory depends on having many advisors. I'm not sure the exact scripture, but I know it says that victory depends on having many advisors. And so just like you honor up, down, and all around, you got to have people around you that are up above you, your mentors, your leaders, your pastors, your parents, whoever that might be above. You got to have people below that you can pour into, and you got to have people at the same level all around who can walk through this life that you're walking through, walk through the same things that you're walking through, and walk through together to continue to learn and to grow. So good, Mike. I love it so much, and I love you. And so, our last couple questions here as we wrap up. We talk about what playing where your feet are means to you, and we talk about some advice for others around each other that want to lift each other up. But I think some people hear this episode and they're thinking, man, who is this Mike Noriega that is so wise and passionate and speaks so well and has this beautiful story and is rooted so theologically sound? I want to be like him and I want to do the things that he's doing and I want to play where my feet are and I want to make this impact and have purpose in my position. But maybe I don't know exactly where to start. So, what's your encouragement to them today or your advice for those who want to play where their feet are, but maybe aren't exactly sure what to do first?
Well, I would encourage them to read both of our books, really, because I think you and I both outline it. Because there came a point where you and I, both in our individual stories, were like, what's next?
Mhm.
What do we do from here? How do we rise after falling? And so that would be probably my number one encouragement, to read our books, listen to our stories. There's a scripture in Revelation that says that we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And what that means to me is that, well, the blood of the Lamb, that's referring to Jesus, that Jesus is truly the one uncollapsible soul.
Mm.
That when the same presence that raised Jesus from the dead on that third day lives inside of you, oh my gosh, that's truly what makes your soul uncollapsible. And I think that's why you and I, in so many ways, we wrote completely different stories, but we wrote the same book, because it points to, really, if God is for you, who can be against you? Because when he lives inside of you, you have that faith to get back up. You have that faith to trust that he's going to work all things for your good, no matter how bad, no matter how terrible the situation is. Because the truth is when that uncollapsible soul lives inside of you, you can go through a collapse around you without the collapse happening within you because of him. So that's my one word of encouragement, to check out our books and read them.
I love it. I had to mute myself because I wanted to put down my mic and make sure I wrote down to that verse in Revelation about you overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of your testimony. That's something that, I mean, I've heard that verse a million times. And Metro Life Church, my church, also actually has a song literally based off of those lyrics. And so like I've sung
Yeah.
that 1,001 times. But I just think hearing that again, which resonated really a lot with me, of just how, we think of these situations and we think of this heartbreak and this pain and we think, how am I going to overcome this? How am I going to overcome this? And it's, well, maybe the more obvious answer of the blood of the Lamb, Jesus Christ. Like, sure, we all know that. It's hard to kind of walk through it sometimes, But I think that second part is so powerful too. The word of your testimony. Man, it might be tough, but just talk about it. Talk about it to others, to trusted advisors, to a therapist, to a preacher, to a pastor, whoever it might be. But also share your testimony. Talk about it on social media. Talk about it on a platform. Talk about it and tell others what the Lord has done for you, what He's done in your life. Because we know that if, again, you started off saying the same thing too in your book, in this podcast, and everything, is that when you're preaching, it's the same thing. When you're preaching, you're finding someone in the crowd because that was you. You know, I say it all the
Yes.
time. This book, this podcast, this message of play where your feet are, and everything that I've ever said out of my mouth, it's all a sermon to myself. You know, I'm
Yeah.
not this girl that knows how to play where her feet are all the time and it does it so well. I'm probably the opposite. And that's why I keep talking about it, because I need to always remind myself, with my necklace, with my bracelet, with my merch, with my podcast, with my book, with everything that I do. Hey, don't forget to play where your feet are today. Don't forget to play where your feet are today. Don't forget to play where your feet. Every single day I have to do this to myself because it is a constant reminder. It's not a one-time check mark. And the same thing with your book as well. It's not a one-time thing that we're probably going to go through pain, that we're going to grieve, that we're going to go through a breakdown, or we're going to have whatever it might be, a breakup, whatever it might be. So I think these are so important. Like you said, your best advice is to read the books. And I know we almost say that as a shameless plug or somewhat of a joke, but it's so true. It's so true, because these books, time and time again, are not only our hearts and our testimonies, but I think it's these great reminders that are evergreen. We say that in journalism all the time. It's evergreen, meaning you can share it, you can post it, you can read it, you can do it anytime, every time, all the time, because it is this constant reminder that you do and you do need. So Mike, I just so appreciate you coming on today, and you're sharing your heart, and you're sharing your story, and you're sharing about your book, and you're sharing about your passions, and sharing everything about you with us, Scott, because God is really just putting His favor on you, but He's doing incredible things through you. And I thank you that you are sharing the word of your testimony and giving it to us and pulling in the blood of the Lamb in it as well, because it's so awesome to witness. So as this podcast ends, does not mean that our relationship with you should. It definitely means that we should stay caught up with everything you're doing. And so whether it is wedding planning or book number 2, or who knows what you have coming, I'm just saying this out loud. I'm manifesting or prophesying for you. But whatever you have coming up in the future, I know that we all want to stay connected. So how best can we continue to follow you in all things that you do?
So I am on all social media platforms at the Mike Noriega. And you can also go to MikeNoriega.com or UncollapsableSoul.com. It'll take you to the same place, and you can connect with me there. So that would be the easiest way to find me.
I love it so much. And we'll make sure to plug everything below in the description so you guys can just scroll and click and find him and everything that he's doing. Seriously, do stay caught up. And if you're in Miami, meet this man. Come to VU Church, go to Volleyball Crew, whatever you need to do, get around Mike Noriega, because you want to get whatever he has on him from God. And it's like the paralytic man and his friends. Like, if you are paralyzed right now, find Mike, because he's going to pick you up and he will build you up and he'll build you to be a better person. So Mike, I appreciate you once again for hopping on. I welcome you officially to the PWIFA Play Where Your Feet Are family. And with all of that said, I give you the floor one last time for one more gold nugget you might have, or a fun fact, or who knows what. But this is your moment, and this is your mic drop for whatever you want to end us with.
Best advice I've ever gotten. Take your calling very seriously. Just don't take yourself too seriously.
I love it. Well said, well said. And he says it with a smile, as he always does. Mike Noriega, thank you for hopping on the PWIFA Play Where Your Feet Are podcast. Like I said, you're officially a part of the fam, so we are here in your corner for whatever you need, supporting you, rooting you on, and of course, promoting everything that you're up to, because we love to see it, and we love seeing God work through you. So thanks again for hopping on, and have a great night.
Thank you for having me. You're the best, man.
All right, I told y'all that was going to be a great episode. I can't really say any more, because literally incredible. I love Mike so much. I'm honored he was on the podcast. If you've been following us on Play Where Your Feet Are, he was actually on our very first webinar too that we held on IG Live. So stick around for more things like that, more books, more merch. camps, retreats, clinics, and all the things that we got going on with Play Where Your Feet Are. So much excitement to come. Thanks so much for watching and listening, and whatever you're doing with the PWIFA Play Where Your Feet Are podcast, watching on YouTube, listening on all podcasting platforms. You can tell it's been a minute since I did this. I'm a little rusty. But y'all, I love you so much. Thanks for sticking it out in this little random break that we announced nothing during it. And thanks for watching and coming back. Like I said, so much more to come this season. And I'm just gonna stop talking now because I want to tell y'all everything, but I can't just yet. So, without further ado, that's all I got. Be blessed and play where your feet are.